devices. And if you want to compete with them, you need to go to places to buy it from them. And obviously, they charge a premium and go to places with very low electricity. So today, most of the mining is China or Iceland or some in Canada or Eastern Europe. It's a very, very competitive space. Most of the community and the ecosystem can't be part of it. But proof of stake, it's the same mechanism to decentralize and secure the network, but it enables participation by anybody that holds a token by delegating it to guardians, and guardians are the ones that choose the validators. This is how we keep the network decentralized. Essentially, in orbs, there's 4 roles. There are the applications, there are the block producers, they upload transactions to the networks. There's validators that they validate the transactions, they validate the consensus. Then there's the guardians that choose the validators. This is a big difference. Most of the networks, the node operators and the guardians are the same people. In orbs, we actually created 2 roles for these functions. And then there are the token holders that can delegate their tokens to the guardians. Because we understand that people mainstream, they're not going to check every day, what is the validators doing, who has a good uptime, who is securing the network, like they're supposed to do. This is why we also created the role of delegators and guardians. You can delegate your tokens to guardians. They're like your representative, like in a representative democracy, and they will drive the agenda for the delegators. So by one time delegating the tokens, you can enjoy 8% yield annually to the tokens, which also being part of the network, securing it and helping us grow the community, but also being rewarded for that. So it's a similar world to the miners, but everybody can take part of that.
So any other questions? You had time to think about questions while we were talking and talking. Any questions? Technical questions also.
요것 좀 하나. 아니 이거.
이거 가져가시려면 신부터 주셔야 돼요.
저 파월이 체인이 체인이라고 말씀드렸잖아요. 그래서 비트코인의 속도가 굉장히 중요한 거잖아요. 그래서 그 속도를 되게 빠르게 하려면 어떤 대안을 하시는지 궁금합니다.
So Satoshi developed the Bitcoin protocol, right, to be slow for a reason. It's not like in 2008 no one understood that speed is going to be important, right? So consensus is, by definition, you need time to get consensus. Otherwise, you're not securing the transaction. So speed versus security is not something you just move it from speed to security and everything works just fine, right? If you move from security to speed, you're giving up security, right? Like we were saying before, you want to move to a network that has only 21 nodes, you can do 100,000 transactions a second, but you have no security. So Bitcoin is the safest, longest chain, and the longest chain doesn't mean, for example, it's twice as long as Ethereum. Bitcoin is 100,000 times more secure than Ethereum. It's much, much harder to break Bitcoin than it is to break Ethereum, right? So that's why most of the value, $150 billion, is sitting in Bitcoin, right? Every hacker in the world is trying to break Bitcoin. Every hacker in the world, I guarantee it's the biggest prize that every hacker has. No one has been able to do it. They broke into the Pentagon. They broke into every place, right? They broke into every voting machine in America. But no one has been able to break the Bitcoin blockchain. So I don't think you need to make it faster. It's perfect for what it was designed for. Now, you want something faster? Great, here, you have orbs to run something faster, do something different. But for store value, for money, you don't need anything faster. It works just fine, okay? If we need, for the amount of people that need to move transactions, transactions between each other on the Bitcoin, not for commerce, but just for store value, it is fast enough. You don't need anything more than that. So I don't think you need to improve Bitcoin. You can design other blockchains to do other things, but we don't need to make Bitcoin faster.
Yeah, so there was for a couple of years a big debate if scaling Bitcoin should be done on-chain or with off-chain solutions. As Alex mentioned, to keep Bitcoin as light as possible, as decentralized as possible, client the full nodes, and then scale using the Lightning Network, for example, which is off-chain transactions. This is what currently I think the roadmap is for Bitcoin. Others thought that Bitcoin needs to be scaled by making the block size bigger. Then it was Bitcoin Cash, and there was Bitcoin SV. But fundamentally, I actually agree with what Alex said. I see Bitcoin today less as digital cash, but more as digital gold. Because it's very hard to be a medium of exchange, cash, money, and a store of value. They a little bit contradict each other. Because if I think it's a store of value, if I think the value will go up, then why would I spend it on day-to-day things?
On pizza.
Exactly. If it's a medium of exchange, it should be more stable. So e-commerce can use it and have predictability. So I think, for example, Libra, the project by Facebook, which is a stable coin, is much easier as a medium of exchange, but it will never be as valuable as Bitcoin because it's stable, it's meant to be stable, it's meant to be a medium of exchange. Bitcoin, the way I see it, it's a new asset class, it's digital gold. I see it as part of my saving portfolio. Obviously, I do think that Bitcoin can become also better digital cash than some other fiat currencies, for example, in Venezuela, in Argentina, in some of the developing countries or countries that are failing. Bitcoin can even be better medium of exchange. But I think overall there would be a virtual currency that is very stable, medium of exchange, and Bitcoin that is more digital gold. And being both of them, I think would be hard. So I think right now, scaling Bitcoin off-chain or using other infrastructure protocols is the right way, not necessarily interfering so much with the Bitcoin protocol on-chain.
And to add to what you're saying, the dollar is a horrible store of value, but it's a great medium of exchange. 90% of all transactions in the world are dollar denominated, but if you put your money in dollar, you lose a lot every day, right? It's just a horrible store of value. So, but let's talk about Libra for a second, because I'm sure there are a lot of populists there with Libra. So just to share with you what I think of Libra, right? And Facebook, how many people here are on Facebook? You use Facebook? Anyone? They brought you fake friends, and then they brought you fake news, and then they brought you a fake American president, and now they're bringing you a fake blockchain, you know? So fake. So people somehow expect from a company that continues to deliver bad things to deliver something good. It is not going to be good for you. The Libra does not do anything for you. It just takes your money for free, just like the bank. And it gives the yield, it gives whatever it generates from your money to the 26 nodes that it's going to have. The people that pay $10 million to get a node, they get all the profit. They pay $10 million, and then every month they're going to get money from Libra. You're going to get nothing back. You can move money around, but you're going to get nothing back from it, right? Orbs pays you back 7-8% for your money, right? And so on. So you have to think about it, is it really for you? Is it helping you? It's just another toll collector, right? You don't need another toll collector. You can go on a highway here and pay tolls all day long. You don't need another one. It's not helping us at all. Do you agree or do you disagree?
Yeah.
You're going to be more diplomatic, right?
No, I think that it's nice to bash some of the large enterprises, but I do.
Truth teller, I'm not bashing anybody.
And I don't use Facebook, I don't use Instagram, but I do think if you look, what are the largest companies in the world today? In the end of the day, they are marketplaces. Uber connects between people and cars. Amazon between people and shopping, e-commerce, Airbnb between apartments and AdWords marketplace. Facebook is also a marketplace for ads. So they generate their value from their ecosystem. The users, Facebook is us, Airbnb is the people that put their apartments, Uber is the drivers. So I do think they're adding a lot of value to the world. Uber, I think it's a great app, for example, Airbnb is great. But they're gaining also too much power. And because they're becoming so big, like these 5 companies, they're about 90% of the S&P 500 or 50% or whatever. They're growing very, very big and they're becoming even more and more powerful. And at the end of the day, we need to ask ourselves how we can make the balance more correct. And I think blockchain is one of the ways to do that. And I think that these big companies, they will add this. I always had this question, how do blockchain technology becomes mainstream? I always understood blockchain as a new asset class, as an investment thesis. Everybody needs to diversify. I understood Ethereum as a new kind of company. The technology is now enabling us to collaborate on a peer-to-peer global scale and trustless. So Ethereum is a non-profit foundation. In 3.5 years, the Ether token grew 4,000x. It's one of the fastest wealth creations ever in the world. And they haven't signed one legal agreement ever. So it's 30,000 people collaborating on top of Ethereum without trusting each other. This is huge, because today there was for-profit companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon. There were non-profit companies doing amazing things such as Wikipedia, Mozilla, and Linux Foundation, but they don't know how to sustain it. And suddenly we have a non-profit, open-source company that is creating wealth, but everybody enjoys it. The users, the investors, the application builders, the developers, the third-party providers. But again, Ethereum is just very small from an adoption perspective. And I always ask myself, how do blockchain actually get used day to day? And I think the way it will be adopted is that I think some of the largest enterprises in the world, like Google, like Facebook, like Uber, like Apple, will start adopting this technology. And you will ask yourself, why would this company give away power or be less centralized? Why would they do that? They're for-profit. They like making as many money as possible and give dividends to their shareholders. This is basically their protocol. This is what they're aimed to do. And the reason is I think that by opening up their governance will actually make them even more competitive. And this is the reason they will adopt it. They won't adopt it because they're good. They will adopt it because they will make them even more profitable or even more competitive. A good example I like to give is like between Apple and Google. Apple, when they released the App Store and the iPhone, they had complete dominance over this new marketplace. They had a great user experience. It was for free. They controlled 100% of the market. And when Google and Microsoft started thinking, how do we compete with Apple? If we just copy their product, Apple already has complete dominance. So what did Google do? They open source Android. So now they can't monetize the operating system anymore because it's open source. This creates much larger trust with other players. So Samsung can put Android inside their phone. Huawei can put Android inside their phone because they know that Google can't screw them anymore. It's open source. They can fork away. But for Google, it's still very valuable because they own the operating system, the data, the live instance that is running the operating system. So actually Android today is 85% of the market share, even though it's open source compared to Apple that is closed source now, it's 15%. So I think more and more companies will enable blockchain technology because it will take away some of their power, but it will give them more competitiveness because the most important thing for them is the marketplaces, the users, the drivers, the apartments, and to win, they need to give trust. For example, if there was a ride-sharing application that enables the drivers to be part of the governance, it's better than a ride-sharing that doesn't give any control to the drivers. Today, Uber employs about 100,000 people. They have zero governance. So I think this will become a trust graph, will become something that large enterprises are competing on, and this is why they will start adopting blockchain technology, just as they started adopting open source code, not because they liked it, but because it makes them even more competitive.
I have another question.
You have all the questions.
I'm really sorry about that. I'm going to use Korean language, okay? Just, 말했듯이 요즘 구글이라던가 아니면 애플, as you mentioned, 말했듯이 그러한 거대한 기업들이 앞으로 10년 후에는 블록체인을 가지고 움직이는 기업들이 유니콘 기업들이 굉장히 많이 나올 거예요. 그런 기업들과 어떻게 대면을 할 것 같으며 앞으로 한 5년이나 10년 후에 오브스가 어떤 위치에서 블록체인의 기반을 가지고 퍼블릭 체인을 통해서 세상이 에코시스템을 어떻게 하실 것인지를 좀 부탁드릴게요. 말씀해 주시면 좋겠어요.
So in 10 years, there will be many unicorn blockchain companies, like big companies. But when the times come, like Google or Amazon's big conglomerates, how do you think they will compete with them? And then when the time comes, how do you think orbs will be positioned in the industry?
In 5 years, 10 years away.
So first of all, the way that I see the market, I don't see other infrastructure as direct competition because each one is attacking and going to the market in a different way. Orbs isn't smarter than Ethereum, Polkadot, or Cosmos, or Polkadot, Hyperledger, Quorum. It's just that we're going to the market via different vertical, as I mentioned before in one of the slides. But even if I look at all of the infrastructure today, I think there's about only 10 large infrastructure projects that are very well funded. I can count them. It's about 10 large infrastructures. I don't think necessarily there will be additional ones because it's very hard to raise this significant amount of funds to build these long-term projects and to create a network effect. So I think there is competition between these 10. Some of them will become bigger, potentially some of them will disappear, but I don't think there will be tens and hundreds of large infrastructure. There will be few for different markets. So this is one. And why I think they have big advantage over Apple and Samsung and Facebook and some of the large enterprises is because they will be able to provide a higher level of guarantee. What makes Orbs unique, Ethereum unique, Cosmos, Polkadot, Tezos is that we have a token and the token aligns the economical incentives within the network. So it's a public permissionless infrastructure. This is something that is very hard for the enterprises to create. For them to create a token and a permissionless infrastructure and token economy, I think it's something that from a regulatory perspective scares them because they have a lot to lose. They're not like a startup that can go and be very disruptive and create this network effect like Bitcoin did and Ethereum did. We see Facebook even now they're trying to build a private blockchain, super compliant, KYC, AML, and they're getting a lot of scrutiny from the regulator. I'm not even sure if the project will lift off. I think Libra will do it, but if it was public permissionless at the scale of Facebook, I'm sure the regulator would have shut it down very early because there's a point of failure, which is this big company. And by the time they would try to shut down Bitcoin or Ethereum or Orbs or Cosmos or Tezos, it becomes impossible because it's a decentralized network, it's an open network that creates a much faster network effect. So I think enterprises won't compete with public blockchains, and I think public blockchains, there's not going to be too many because it's a very long-term project. We're running a marathon, you need a lot of funding, and I think there's not going to be many new ones. There's about 10. This is the competition.
So going back to the Voice of IP movie, remember we talked about watching the movie? If you want to know what's going to happen in the future, you have to go watch the movie from 1995. In 1995, IBM and AOL and all the big companies said to all the corporate customers, you can't trust the internet. The internet is a crazy place. It's open, it's public. You want to create a private version. You want to create an intranet. Anyone here old enough to remember the intranet? Right? And 94, 95, 96, all the way to 2000, it looked like the intranet is going to win. Because all the big companies were building stuff on the intranet. But the public network was always bigger, stronger, faster than any intranet, right? And that's what you're seeing today. Today you're seeing the same movie again, right? Libra Hyperledger, all these things are just intranets. They're all things, private networks that are trying to compete, like I said to you, with the most powerful computer in the world. The Bitcoin network is more powerful than the 500 largest supercomputers. Some of them are here in Seoul. Okay? It's more powerful than all the Chinese computers and all the Korean computers and all the Japanese supercomputers and all the American supercomputers. So you can't compete with it. I don't care if you're IBM or if you're Facebook or if you're anyone else. Okay, you will not be able to compete with that infrastructure. So the horse is out of the barn, like we say in America, right? It's too late. The race already started 10 or 11 years ago, and all the corporate customers that are coming now, if they choose to do private blockchains, they're going to lose. If they choose to do public blockchains, they're going to win. So right now, you don't see a lot of people moving to the public blockchain, what Orbs is building, but we are big believers that the public blockchain is the winning protocol. Who was AWS #1 customer? Do you know? Amazon Web Services. Who was their #1 customer? Amazon. They built it for themselves. Then they opened it for everybody else. Then they said, here, we built such a great product for ourselves, now you can use it, right? So it's the same thing with Orbs, right? You build it, you test it, you make sure it runs on the Orbs coin, then you can open it up for many, many other customers to use. And again, it's not about store value. What Bitcoin does is not what Orbs does. So you have to think about what are the applications that require public blockchain, require independent governance, require scaling, all these things that we talked about that I showed you in my presentations and annual presentations, and really think about that from that perspective. Because when the winning app comes in, the DApp, the distributed application that's going to win, that's going to become the next Facebook, it's not going to come from Facebook. It's going to come from a small company that's sitting, two guys sitting in a coffee shop, right there, across the street. You know? That's where it usually comes from. Just like the winners on the internet, none of the winners on the internet were people that were big guys in 1995. Show me one. One company that was huge in 1995 that is the winner on the internet. You understand? So the customers that Orbs needs to find, many of them don't exist yet. They're just now being created.
There's a lot of, for example, discussion in the media that Bitcoin, it's not so interesting, but blockchain, this is the real innovation. But Bitcoin is what makes blockchain trustless and permissionless, because it's the economical incentives that keeps the network decentralized. So Libra doesn't have a token, IBM, they don't have a token, because it's private network. It's just between trusted parties. There's no innovation there. It's like it's like a database with people that already trust each other. If you want to create a network that is completely open, that has a network effect, that can grow as the internet grew, and as Alice mentioned, they essentially won the internet, the closed internet, and you have to have economical incentive to keep it decentralized, and this is what Bitcoin is for, this is what the orbs token is for, and I think that is what is unique about these startups. And enterprises, they can't create these tokens because of the regulatory burden that it will bring on top of them.
Okay, so now we're running out of time.
Thank you very much.
마지막 질문 하나만 더 하고 이제 마무리하겠습니다. Last one.
일단은 이제 블록체인이라고 하면 이제 분산 원장이잖아요. 근데 모든 정보를 다 이제 분산 원장에 올릴 수가 없는데 블록체인이 사용된다고 하면 아까 언급하셨듯이 이제 정부나 아니면 큰 기업에서 사용될 거라고 했고, 그리고 그런 정보들이 모든 정보들이 이제 분산 원장에 올릴 수 없다고 봐요. 그래서 분명히 이제 프라이빗한 데이터라거나 아니면 좀 이제 치명적인 데이터 같은 것들이 이제 분명히 올라가야 되는데, 그런 부분들을 어떻게 프라이빗하게 유지될 거고, 이제 그런 부분들이 이제 오브스는 어떤 식으로 이제 해결하려고 하는 건지 이 부분 쪽을 궁금합니다.
So basically, blockchain is distributed ledger. So if the mass adoption comes, maybe some government or a big company will gonna use it, but they cannot put all the data on the blockchain as there are some private information. So how Orbs is gonna solve that problem?
first of all, there are some technologies that now emerging to solve privacy, like zero knowledge proof, Zcash, and it's still quite expensive, but I think over time it become more and more usable. Israel is one of the leaders in the space of creating private transactions, on-chain transactions. And obviously there's also some off-chain solution that are state channels. So two parties that trust each other, they can do a lot of activity between them and just broadcast the settlement transaction and not everything that is going on a daily basis. But from our experience, what we've seen is that when you really look at the use cases that blockchain is applicable for, a lot of the times you start to understand that it's actually the use cases that the information is public and transparent, and then people can start building on top of it because there is a source of truth. So many times, if what you care about is privacy in the business world from an application perspective, not necessarily you should use a blockchain. And I will give you an example just from a regulatory perspective. Let's say you have a private blockchain that is very private, because this is what the enterprise world cares about, privacy, and it's 20 different companies inside this network. What we need to understand is two things. One is that usually the companies inside the consortium, they don't trust each other to showcase all of this information, so they have the same problem also within private networks. Secondly, even if they're okay with sharing this data, from a regulatory perspective, somebody outside of the network can say, look, regulator, there's 20 companies that are colluding between themselves and controlling prices or whatever thing. We want to see what's going on there. They're colluding. So just from a regulatory perspective and antitrust perspective, a lot of these private networks, I think, will have to showcase a lot of the activities inside these private consortiums. So again, from our experience looking at many different use cases, a lot of what the enterprise world is doing today doesn't need a blockchain to do that. But where we actually see real use cases is mostly where the information is public and auditable. So we think there's three kinds of things that blockchain can give guarantees. One, it's data, so the data is authentic. Two, on the algorithmic level, how is the data created by the algorithm? And thirdly, on the governance, what are the rules, how are they changed? These are the three levels of truth that blockchain can give guarantees. So if you look about Bitcoin, why is Bitcoin so unique and so powerful? Because it has these three guarantees the truth. Every transaction is public, everybody can see it. The network is completely forkable. If I'm not happy with the Bitcoin network, I can fork it. Not just the code, which is open source, but all of the data. So Bitcoin Cash is a complete fork of the Bitcoin network, which creates an even more competitive ecosystem. And the third thing is that everybody knows the rules, everybody knows how it's changed, 51%, longest chain attack. So actually Bitcoin is so powerful, and it's such a killer use case for blockchain technology, because everything is transparent and auditable and public and the governance and so on. So a lot of the use cases that today we hear that are being applied to blockchain, I think you don't really need a blockchain there. They rely on trust. You can run it on a centralized database between parties.
So I think the math is right now we're creating more data in 6 months now than all the data that was created in the history of mankind. That's how fast everything is moving on the data side, right? So it is moving faster and faster because we're producing 4K movies and every picture is taken in HD. My kids just run things 24 hours a day, the cameras. I mean, they're just not, right? And everything is uploaded to the cloud and so on. So that entire network, the internet, the entire network, is actually not connected in any way to the blockchain. You show me one connection in the blockchain and the internet. It's two different worlds. Right? And what we're missing are really bridges. Zero proof is a perfect example. If you could create a zero proof system that enable you to validate that something is real. Here's a picture of Donald Trump, doing something good, for change. Prove it, right? How do you prove it from a zero proof standpoint that this is authentic and it's not something that got fabricated and misplaced and brought to you by the Russians or whatever, right? That is the problem we're having. That you can go on any network on the internet and you don't know if it's real or if it's not real, right? And that's what the blockchain is supposed to deliver. It's supposed to deliver that truth, right? So one of the killer apps that I think will happen is the ability to use those networks, to bridge those networks between the world that we live in and this blockchain world that really no one understands. Most people don't understand what that is. Like I was saying, it's a tank, right? What do you need a tank for, right? When there's war, you need a tank. That's just here. When you need to verify that something is real, you need to be able to go and ask for that zero proof. You say, is this image really original? Was it created by this camera that said, here's my private key, and I actually generated every pixel on this image, right? Things like that we're not there yet. I mean, we might be 5 or 10 years away from it. But I think we're going to move to a world where everything is going to everything in the digital world is going to have to be validated through a zero proof or other type of mechanisms on a public blockchain that is running just for that audit trail function, right? Which again, we're not there yet. I just invented a new business. Maybe you can build it.
I'll just give you an example why I say not everything needs to be on a blockchain. Take an example, DocuSign. DocuSign is a very popular company that enables to sign documents online. So they pay about $50 million a year to Amazon to post all of these different documents. So if I'm corresponding with somebody and let's say we send a draft or different version that are not even signed, why would I want to store multiple copies on a blockchain that is very expensive and so on? I would want to store on a blockchain just the signed contract to make it immutable. So Amazon can't change it, DocuSign can't change it. It's a much stronger guarantee. So about 5% from the cloud cost of DocuSign, I think, will be on top of a blockchain because it adds much better guarantees to the different users that are using it, that nobody can change the contract once it's signed. But the rest of the 95%, it's okay if it's on a centralized database. Like, I don't care if an unsigned document is being manipulated or something like that. It's not the end result. In the case of Uber, I don't care that a centralized database does the matching engine between the driver and the taxi. Having this engine peer-to-peer that different drivers are doing similar tasks to try to own the user creates such complexity and cost that sometimes a centralized database is much better. But there are things that I do care about Uber opening up, like governance and inclusion in the decision process and empowering the drivers. And I think that would be good for drivers to also make a ride-sharing app even more competitive. So the way we look at it, we see blockchain is a database. For a lot of use cases, a centralized database is better because it's faster, cheaper, private. But there are some use cases that 5% that blockchain is the right way to solve these problems. Like elections, for example. India is